You have my appreciation too for the comments that you made during our Watchtower study. The Society is very concerned about the quality of our meetings, and as we mentioned the other night, most of our meetings now require active participation. Our service meeting will have question and answers. At times our instruction talk has question and answer parts, and your preparation, and you're free to make comments on things that you've looked up, maybe word definitions, personal expressions, how you feel about the material. And the conductors now will be allowing us a little more freedom to do that by waiting as we express ourselves. And then if there's a major point that's left out, why you can ask those questions. So do your part. I really enjoyed the meeting today, and I'm sure that you did too. And we thank the brothers on the microphones for their promptness. There's very little lag between when they called on somebody and the time the microphone got there. And I thought most of the comments were expressed in a heartfelt way. Even if we look at the paragraph, we're still expressing how we feel. And this covenant arrangement is, we've been taking a close look at that, because in our congregation, the belief that there are two classes of people, that's not taught in the world in general. When you look at that prophecy of Abraham, by means of your seed, all nations of the earth will be blessed. And Paul explains, if you belong to Christ, you're really Abraham's seed. So there's a seed class that's going to bless the world. Now, if we take that to mean that the seed are good people, then the only ones to be left are bad people, which doesn't make sense, that they're going to bless the wicked. And so there must be two classes of good people. Now, that's a marvelous, refreshing spiritual gem that you don't find taught in the churches of Christendom. And then the details about Atonement Day, the three different animals, the bull, the two goats, how it was for certain people. We appreciate the scholarship of the organization in providing these rich spiritual lessons for us. And we thank you for your bringing those materials, those points out. Cutting a straight course in this wicked world is a very difficult thing at best. And the ones that we fear for the most, I think, are our young people, our children. And one of the reasons is because they're so much like us. We were eating at one of the friends' homes recently, and I thought I was looking at the son's picture on the wall, but he said, no, that's John's picture, not Johnny's. And sure enough, you look at John's picture, and John, when he was that age, looked identical to Johnny. And I think we see that. Maybe you see that in your sons or daughters. When you look at them just the right way, it's kind of spooky. It's almost like looking at yourself when you were at that age. I think that they're even more so when they're babies. They may be so close. And what scares us, because we remember what we were thinking when we were their age, the confusion that we went through, and how we almost feel like it was a miracle that we found the truth. And we're so concerned that our young people find it true. So we wonder, is there any way, is there something in the works that makes it so that if we do this, we can help our children and ourselves to stay spiritually strong? Well, there is, and it's what the Insight book calls the divine law of creation. Now, if you turn to Genesis chapter 1, it's explained there in verse 11, but when you read it, it doesn't sound like it just sounds like it's a description of the third creative day, but actually, Moses is recording a divine pattern that Jehovah put in place that works. And it goes back to this idea of a seed. And it's Genesis chapter 1 and verse 11. Seed is a very important thing in all the creative process. To lock within a small thing everything needed for that small object to produce an adult is an enormous concept. Now, angels were not created that way. Angels are duplicated, I guess. After Jehovah, when he created the angel kind, he didn't start with seeds. He created the full mature creature with all their different personalities. But in life on the earth, save our first couple, Adam and Eve, the rest of living things were produced by seed. All the vegetation, all of the living things, except for the original parents, were created by seed. Notice how it's expressed here. In Genesis 1, verse 11. And God went on to say, let the earth cause grass to shoot forth, vegetation bearing seed, fruit trees yielding fruit according to their kinds, and seed of which is in it upon the earth. And it came to be so. And the earth began to put forth grass, vegetation bearing seed according to its kind, and trees yielding fruit, the seed of which is in it according to its kind. Then God saw that it was good. Now, what in this is different? What are we reading here? Well, you see, when you take seed, good seed, and you put it into the ground, it grows. But how does that work? How does it become the adult plant, the flower, the tree? It is not the seed that produces the adult. You notice what did it? Let's take a look at that again. And verse 12. It says, and the earth began to put forth grass. When you take good seed and you put it in good earth, the earth produces the seed. Now you see, you just kind of, you give it a first glance, you say, well, the seed grew up. But you see, the seed didn't. The seed, with its power inside, it began to branch out and reach out and begin to draw into itself the earth. And it pulled the earth inside, and then it began to push the earth in this new growing living thing, and the earth is producing this. Not the seed. The seed is just this big. There's nothing there, see. But the earth is producing. When you see a massive tree, it didn't come out of the seed. The seed drew the ground, the soil, and from the soil, all the elements that are in that soil are now in the tree. If you were to take some sort of a level plane there, you would see that all around it the earth went down and is now absorbed into this tree. And it goes out along in a tree, for instance, it goes out to along, and it is searching for something. It is searching for it has to be in a moisture. So water plays a part. Water will trap the environment and bring it to it. But it'll go out like a ficus tree, if you have one of those in your yard, and you have an older sewer system. It'll go out and it'll crush that sewer system, and it'll go up into the sewer and drag it out. If that's where the moisture is, it'll go into the sewer and grab it. And if you're a plumber, you know, it's a lot of our work in Miami, you know, is these ficus that go out and they go around, they just crush it looking for the moisture, because all these living things take it from the soil. If you want to grow something in Arizona, you can grow some of the greatest vegetables, but you better take soil. There's no soil there. There's some dust, some dirt, it's all depleted, there's nothing there. But if you take a wonderful pot of soil and you plant it, the sun, and bring some water, well, you can produce wonderfully, but you have to bring soil. It is the soil. If you were raised in farm country and you look across a farmer's field, there'll all be this great corn, you know, high as an elephant's eye, as the song goes, but then in some parts of the field, well, there's hardly any. Now, sometimes it's bad seed, but the farmer will say that I planted the same seed in the whole field. And he'll ask the college to come over, the agricultural university, and they'll come and they'll take soil samples and say the soil's bad. There wasn't enough water. It was too much, or whatever it was. But it's the ground that produces. The September 15th, 1993 Watchtower says, "We are not born with godly devotion, nor do we automatically acquire it from godly parents. Instead, godly devotion must be cultivated." See, to help us, we have what the Insight book calls the divine law of creation. If we take good seed and put it in good soil, it will produce good fruitage. Now, in lower forms of life, there is very little that has to be done as far as training. You get a little hummingbird, and it migrates maybe from here all the way to Brazil, but there's no hummingbird schools, where there's mapping and all of that, and radar. It's all inside the little brain, and Java programs all of that in to the DNA, and it just works. You can take goslings and raise them here, and then in the fall, if you're in an area where the geese fly over, something triggers and it'll go up and it'll just fly with them in the same routine. But the higher you get in the life forms, there begins to be a blend of training and instinct. And even in the highest form, in humans, there's still a blend of instinct. Right now, if I'm talking about food, it will trigger a mechanism and we'll begin to, I want to smell some fried chicken, Maybe you can smell it. Well, it stimulates and some juices start, and then pretty soon you're hungry. Now you can fight that and even subdue it. You can mentally not even be busy in a job of some kind, and maybe you work right through lunch. You can be tired and put it off. Fight, sleep a little bit, and pretty soon it's way into the night. You realize I better get to bed. But you can't fight those natural instincts long. There's a limit. And they've worked this out in humans, that there's a limit on how long you can go without sleep, and pretty soon you collapse. Your body shuts down. And the same way with food. You try to go without, and pretty soon the hunger pangs will be so great that you can hardly resist eating. But as you come up there in the food, or in this life process, the higher the form of life, the more training is needed. There was a program we were watching about bears. Now, bears are a very high form of animal life. Their brains are very sophisticated. They train their bear cubs on how to catch fish. You see them out in the water, they're training them. And they make this loud noise, slap the earth or something, and the cubs will climb up a tree. And they're trained to wait there until they get a signal. You don't come down until I tell you. Now they're showing this where this one bear cub came on down anyway, and the mother saw it and gave it a pop, and boy, it ran up there and it just stayed there. In fact, there was one account where the mother bear had given the signal there was danger. The bear cubs went up, and the mother bear was killed by a hunter. And when they found him, it was days later, and those cubs were still up there. They would not come down. They had been carefully trained in obedience. And so it is with the human creature. There is training required. Now, how do we do the training? Well, it involves also the soil in which we grow. And that's true for youngsters as well as those of us who are older. If you'll turn in Mark chapter 4, Jesus uses this divine law of creation to describe what happens in a person as their personality develops. Now sometimes some of us will say, well, that's just the way I am. Maybe we have a tendency to be happy, or we have a tendency to be rude, or we have a tendency to be gracious, or we have a tendency to be short with people. Now, we say that, we'll say, well, that's just the way I am. But generally that's not the case. You were not created with a tendency toward rudeness or politeness, hospitality or such. But it is something that has been drawn from the people and situations around us. It can be living people, it can be the people we know through our literature, it can be the people that we admire on the films and so forth. Now notice how this is expressed here in Mark chapter 4 and verse... See, the question is, how do we know that the divine law of creation applies to people? That's a good question. Well, let's see if we can find this from Mark chapter 4, verse 26. So he went on to say, in this way the kingdom of God is just as when a man casts the seed upon the ground, and he sleeps at night, and rises up by day. And the seed sprouts and grows tall, just how he does not know. Of its own self, the ground bears fruit. See, of its own self, the ground is producing fruitage. Gradually, first the grass blade, then the stalk head, finally the full grain in the head. But as soon as as the fruit permits it, he thrusts in the sickle because the harvest time has come. Now, when you first read this in your Bible reading, since it's locked in with these other prophecies about what Jesus is going to do, we would think that this prophecy is just another prophecy about the kingdom and how Jesus will do different things. One illustration why Jesus is the one sowing the seed and an enemy sows afterwards. Well, how do we know this isn't one of those? Well, verse 27 explains that the sower of the seed went to sleep. And of course that takes that, gee, that can't be the master. Remember Jesus in Matthew 28 says, look, I'm with you all the days. Jesus never sleeps. He's the master of the harvest. In Paul's missionary tours, he wanted to get to Ephesus. Spirit wouldn't allow it. In our preaching work today, back in the 50s, the brothers would offer prayers. Jehovah, please help us. We want to go into Russia with the message. We want to go into China. And lots of prayers would go up. Spirit didn't. Now there are hundreds and thousands of witnesses in Russia. When it was time, when the Holy Spirit opened the door, and the brothers take advantage of the large door that leads to activity, why, Jehovah blessed it. So Jesus has constantly been on top of it. That's why we're so concerned about following the suggestions in the kingdom ministry, because the Master knows where the fish are. He knows the timing, and he's constantly making the suggestions on how to do it so we can be most productive. I talked to a brother on the phone this morning. We were with their congregation talking about evening witnessing. So they went out last Friday night, evening witnessing. The second door, the man says, sure, I'd be interested in the Bible study. The brother said, I'll see you Saturday morning, 10:30. He said, all right. We had an hour study, and the man said, was at the meeting. And you go, boy. And the brother said, I was so surprised. I didn't think people would open their doors. One of the sisters who went out. She said, I haven't been going out evening witnessing because I thought, at nighttime people would be scared. And she said, everybody talked to me. So I haven't had a good day of service like this in a long time. She said, everybody opens the door, they're all friendly, they're all relaxed. She said, I never thought it would be this way. And then she said to the brother, she says, I got to remember, the faithful slave knows what they're doing by making these recommendations. But here it says that the seed is placed in an environment and the ground then produces the fruitage. Now sometimes we will see in our young people traits that are undesirable, and we'll say, I don't know where he got that. Just like the scripture says, the seed grows and bears fruit. Just how, he does not know. Well, we know how. He's been allowed to be in an environment that was not good. And so we have to control the environment. One of the brothers, we had a real problem in the congregation because his son was using bad language at the Kingdom Hall. Now, I'm not sure if you know that there are different forms of bad language, and we approach it with different severity. There is what can be called abusive language. And abusive language may be terms where we ask, we may use just words that describe just like garbage or body functions that are just you wouldn't really talk about those things together, but not sexual. Just we use bad terms. Maybe we ask God to curse things, that, like asking Jehovah, who's involved with saving mankind, ask him to stop and condemn that tree. God condemn that tree. God condemn that driver. If we're not careful from just using bad language, we can then ask God to do things, which puts it in turn, we've got abusive language, and then you're using God's name in vain. And then that's a very serious sin on our part, to use God's name in vain. And then there are sexually explicit terms. We've got abusive terms that Christians work out of their personalities, where we just use condemnatory expressions or misuse Bible terms, things like that. And then there are phrases where we use God and Jesus in it, which we have to work out because that's so disrespectful. And then there are sexually explicit terms. And if a person were to use sexually explicit terms, the Bible says that cannot be mentioned among us, and so if a person would use those, the elders would talk to him. If he refused, he would be disfellowshipped from the congregation. Well, this youngster, his father said the words here, I don't know where he got that. But of course now we know where he got it. He got it from, it didn't come from the seed. See, it isn't just like something that came out of him. And sometimes you and I will do the same thing. A terrible thought will be lingering in our mind. And Satan wants us to think that it was us. That we are an evil person that has these bad. It doesn't come from the seed. The ground produces it. But you see, we are not like plants that are stationary in any one piece of ground. We can, if we're in the desert, we can surround ourselves with good soil. We can move ourselves away from the sewer, so that's not the only place we have. We can create a wholesome environment. How did the brother solve this problem? He realized he had neglected his family. He took him out in service every week, and he had a Bible study with him every week, and the boy was at every meeting. He was neglecting his son. You see, coming to the congregation meeting or just being present does not in itself create a good environment. First, we must be alert and participating. Now, if we were to just listening to the comments, if our lesson was unstudied, the lesson today might seem kind of disjointed. What are we talking about? Covenants and sacrifices. But as you're well prepared, and then I noticed the sister made a very intuitive comment that kind of brought a couple things together for me. I really appreciated her thought. It made a lot of sense. So it created, even though we study at home, the intuitive comments of one another, now it's like pouring water on the soil. Now the waters of truth are able to bring it up, and you go, oh, I see, that's right. And so our preparation at home and our willingness to drink in the water that is listened follow along. But you see, our meetings are so short compared to the many hours during the day. And if you're a parent, I might mention there's some dangerous times. And it's good for you to know, as we've handled judicial cases with young people, the majority of sins that have been committed by our young people have occurred between 3 and 6 in the day. 3 o'clock and 6 o'clock. So that's a dangerous hour. Our new Awake magazine on gangs mentions it too. That during that time, now you may say, well, my son is 15, he's responsible, and he is, but you see something's happening to him that didn't happen 2 years ago while he was so responsive, so he didn't have a sexuality then. At 15 and 16, he now has an untested sexuality. And you cannot allow him to test his resistance to temptation on his own. He needs to have your help. He needs to have oversight and guidance during that dangerous... Now, when the family's together, when we're together in meetings, it's fine, but it's during those times when no one is there. And so it's suggested if we work, we might be able to pool our resources, and there might be other responsible ones who are in the congregation. We can have them help us to create a continuous wholesome environment. There are no desert areas where now a child might go out and others might bring in the soil. When a young boy down the street or a young girl across the way comes over and spends time when there's no supervision. Well, this father decided that the best way he could do it, he had to create a continuous wholesome environment. There was a Kingdom Hall project, or actually an Assembly Hall project nearby. And that dear brother, and I was at the Assembly Hall project many weeks, and I always saw him and his family. For literally months, he and his sons were up, and they would come home, it would be late, and they would always be sunburned and tired, and they had their water bottles and their food. But let me tell you the change that happened in that boy. Now here was a boy that was rebellious, and it was sad to talk to him. You go, this boy has no chance. At this point, he's 10, 11 years old. He is so rebellious. But in 10, 11 months, the father had literally changed his whole personality. It was the ground that did it. Now, many of us remember, how many of you were raised in Christian homes where you came to the congregation? Many of us remember as we were growing up, I know as I came up going to district conventions, I have washed thousands of trays. We used to have meals. If we were at any of the big conventions, we had trays, and there'd be maybe 5,000 trays and 40,000 people. So as the brothers would bring their trays, we had to quickly wash them and put them back on the line. And we were so small, we had the aprons, and it'd be all the way down to the ground. We had to hike them up, fold them over, and tie them, you know. And sometimes if we had a good overseer, we'd get those little paper hats. That was really had a paper hat on, you know, and you just kind of washing. But for those days, we always go early. Like right now, if you're able to bring your son or daughter up to the assembly hall, we're doing it now with we have our mowing project. It's the Friday before our circuit assembly. May 1st is our mowing to create the environment. Look for opportunities where your sons and your family can be in an environment where there are brothers and sisters doing work. Now, at times, the society has adjusted our quick build arrangement where we don't have just a blanket call and young people, children coming, but there are opportunities before and after these projects. We work on our own building, our young people can be involved, and sometimes we have to clear land, and we have to do things that are outside the actual build. And if you're a tradesman and you could take your son and help paint one of the kingdom halls or work on the outside, we've created an environment that our young people feed on, and the results are wonderful. Auxiliary pioneering from can be a marvelous experience. Now, the reason we're concerned is because Paul says in 2 Corinthians 11:3, he says, I'm afraid that somehow, as the serpent seduced Eve by its cunning, your minds might be corrupted away from the sincerity and the chastity that are due to Christ. Now, this was written in an environment when there were no clubs, there wasn't an MTV, there wasn't movies. Some movies that are even rated like a PG-13 have nude scenes in them. It's pretty common. Imagine we might go to a movie and we thought, well, it was PG-13 and everybody's going to it. It's a very popular movie. Everybody's going, must be okay. And all of a sudden we expose our children to an immorality that a few years ago would have had a restricted view of it. So we had a nice special needs part this week. Before we rush to a movie, even if many people in the community or many people in the congregation have seen it, why does it have that rating? What's the problem? Or ask people to come back. Is there anything objectionable? Were you uncomfortable at anything that happened? Same way with our social gatherings. Now, at times we have social gatherings where a number of people are invited, but sometimes there's uncomfortable things, worldly music, dancing that is suggestive. And the fact that it has happened at one of our social gatherings does not mean that it's an environment that we want to continue. So you have to be careful of wedding receptions, parties that young people go to make sure that the group is a small, wholesome, spiritual environment. If somebody was going by, they would be pleasantly surprised that there's such a wonderful, dignified gathering going on, rather than the neighbors being concerned. I wonder who's got that loud music being played. One of the social gatherings from some of our young people, the police had to be called because the music was loud. There were people out in the front yard who were not behaving like Christians. A terrible environment was created. And so we have to restore that through it takes over a period of time, regular and constant concern about what today can my young people do. Now, what do I have planned today? And when that happens, the next day, now what do I have planned? What movies are they going to watch? Is there a book that they can read? Who can we invite over to our house today? And almost on a day-by-day basis, we create a wonderfully wholesome environment. Now, that's why In our talk today, we talked about abortion. Well, we would never, of course, end the life of our children. But remember, the Bible, Jehovah blessed the husband and wife, and that they could produce children. They could use their procreative powers only within marriage. And there was a good reason for that. And we've seen the heartache in our community of people who have used their procreative powers outside of marriage and create an environment that starts so critically deplete of spirituality. Or maybe the wife has to work, the mother works, and there's no father to take the, or maybe grandparents are raising the children, and it's maybe a distraction to them. So the children end up in a wasteland of an environment. In our Christian homes, we have to fight for the spirituality of our families. And by doing so, Psalm 126, if you'll turn there, Psalm 126 can be our happy experience. I know some of you grandparents who are raising your children, and some of you who are single parents, I know that your responsibilities as parents are trying to you at times and tasks you. But you notice the comforting words here in Psalm 126:5. It says, "Those sowing seed with tears will reap even with a joyful cry. The one that without fail goes forth even weeping, carrying along a bag full of seed, searching for a good environment to place the seed, will without fail come in with a joyful cry, carrying along a mature, full-grown plant that has produced righteous fruitage." And that's one of the things I wanted to commend your congregation on as I look out. You have some wonderful couples, husbands and wives, and some with the families who, as you can't see it from where you are, but I can see it going back this way. You can see in the body language between the husband and wife that these people love each other. They don't just tolerate each other, but they're in love, sometimes after 40 and 50 years. That there are families who are, that the father and mother are fighting for the spirituality of their children. You can tell it, and it's day by day. And we just want to commend your congregation for that wholesome influence. I know it's a struggle. Some of you young people that are attending the meeting today may not enjoy your meeting here at the Kingdom Hall, but it may be because of your relationship at home. So be sure that you separate your love for Jehovah. If you're not getting along with your mom and dad, don't take it out on Jehovah when you come to the meeting. Sometimes we don't pay attention because we want to hurt Grandma. We don't want her to think that we're enjoying this. We don't. Mom and Dad won't let us do something, and so when we're at the meeting, we're going to slump down in a chair. Don't take it out on Jehovah. But this is where we get everlasting life. And as we build a wonderful relationship and cultivate a deep spirituality here, you will contribute to the growth of all of us. We thank you so much for your wonderful support this week in different ways, the way you've cared for our personal needs. We thank you for that, and we look forward to being back. We'll be with the Greenway congregation this next week, and that's why we'll be using the Kingdom Hall on Thursday night. If it turned out where maybe you know someone that missed one of the meetings this week, well, you might invite them to come to the Kingdom Hall next week to share with us. We invite you to stand now. Do we have song number 168? Yes, okay, song number 168, Recognizing Earth's New King. As the brother's getting that ready for us, we're going to, maybe I can ask Brother to have our usual meeting for service.